How's everybody doing? I'm switching between, I will torture myself and I will live code quite a little bit, so let's see how this goes. React in a worker, right? This is how I imagine this title. Let me quickly introduce myself. I'm Stefan from Berlin. So I flew in today, so thank you for the invitation. Edinburgh is lovely. And I work for a company called Twilio, so in case you wonder how to do SMS, phone calls, and whatever communication is out there via an API, you can give Twilio a try, because this is where I work. And I want to talk about CRR, Create React App, right? So when we all started, or when I started doing React, it was horrible. We haven't had a clue how to do this, which bundler do we use, what packages, what's the folder structure, and now we have Create React App, right? We have a global installed dependency, and we can, oh, don't see the video, we can just bootstrap an app in a few minutes, and this is ready to go, right? That's pretty sweet. So, and the result of this is basically this. Can I move? Okay, so the result is this. And this is a classical single-page application, right? I do have some problems with classical or typical single-page applications, though. So when you have a look at Create React App and what it spits out, this is what you see. This is the index HTML that is loaded, and it loads 3 JavaScript bundles because it does some optimization. And then when all these 3 bundles are loaded and executed, we see React, right? So far, so good. We see our app then. But we have a long waiting time. So we have to wait for the 3 scripts to actually be there and look at the blank screen. So we cannot change that and bring a loading spinner in place, right? A CSS loading spinner, it's in there. But still, this one will spin and spin and spin until all the JavaScript is loaded. And I don't think that is a great user experience, right? And then we have these people that disable JavaScript. I hear you, nobody does that. I have friends that do that. Just to annoy developers. So what happens now? Well, we have the spinner in CSS, but we have no JavaScript. Cool. So and these people that disable JavaScript might not be many, but there's one thing about JavaScript. When you, for example, work at BuzzFeed, 13 million requests yearly for JavaScript at BuzzFeed scale will just fail. Because of network. The network is a big question mark in the middle, right? And you might not disable JavaScript actively, but you are one user without JavaScript before and until the JavaScript loads, right? So, and what happens then when you maybe deploy something that has an exception or just fails? And now we have the horrible state here. I did single-page application development for quite a while, and that's the typical spinner of death. Right? Nothing happens. So I think, well, maybe can we do better? And I think we can. So who was watching Google I/O? I think there was some good stuff in there. And the Google DevRel team built this. This is not React, it's Preact. So that's a Minesweeper game. And what they do is they serve an app shell. So when you disable JavaScript, this is what is initially inlined in the HTML bundle. And I think that's cool. And then another inline stuff, more inline stuff is in there, and then it hijacks the application. But the initial experience is great. Because it's not a spinner, and it's not a blank screen. It's already a shell that shows what is coming up. And then in the React ecosystem, we have, of course, tools like Next or Gatsby that give us the option to render more HTML initially and do React on the server side. And they do that by running the same code on the server and on the client. So the way that works is that the browser makes a request for HTML, React runs on the server, spits out some HTML. Now we have already something visible, right? That's not interactive yet, but we get something on the screen right away. Then the bundle is requested, and now the whole thing gets active, right? But the initial user experience is way better than showing a spinner or a blank screen. This is great for performance because people see something instead of my fidget spinner. Google likes it. So Google crawls the internet in 2 phases. The first one is indexing. This one only deals with HTML. And the second one is actually executing JavaScript. You don't know when this happens though, and even Googlers don't tell you when this happens. So you want to serve some HTML so that you get indexed properly and fast. And it's the same code back to front, right? Server side and client side. But is it really? I'm not sure. When you look at Next or Gatsby, usually something like this is in these code bases. So this is a module for fetching, making HTTP requests. And you see there that there's a check for the process module, which kind of signals that we're here in a node environment. Otherwise, do something else. And it's requiring two completely different packages, just pretending to be the same code. But actually, it's not. In case you wonder where this code is coming from, it's from isomorphic unfetch, which is real stuff that is out there. So you see that I really care about not having spinners somewhere, right? So what if we serve HTML from an environment that actually has the same methods as the browser? And this got me thinking. Well, we have one environment that has kind of the same methods, and that could act like a server. So in case you don't know what a service worker is basically a JavaScript file that is a proxy between your browser and the servers, and it allows you to cache and interfere requests so that you can pretend to actually be the server in the middle. The way it works is that in a JavaScript file, you have to register a new service worker, like this. And in this file then, you have access to the requests that are going in and out. And you can basically respond what you want. So I'm very nervous because I do love coding, but are you ready? So let's do an experiment here. And I really would love to do crowd coding. So when you see that I fuck it up, oh, I'm sorry for the F word. When you see that I it up, please scream at me, okay? No pressure. Is that loud enough? All right, cool. You see my terminal? Big enough? Okay, cool. So here we have a project, and what I want to do is I'm going to go run dev. And this will now spin off a dev server with an application, right? So here you see Dogger's Paradise, because I'm a dog person, 100% dog person. What you can do is you can choose a dog, you can go somewhere, and it will show some dogs. And what it basically does, it asks this API endpoint here, dog CEO, which is a thing, right? I love that people build random APIs for these kind of things. I think that's awesome. And you can choose a different dog. Let's pick a third one, just because. I don't know what this is, but let's see. Aw. Nice. So what you see now, though, is that when I refresh this, I have a loading spinner, right? This is a typical single-page application. It doesn't ship anything. It works. Yeah, maybe. Not when JavaScript fails, and it could also feel a little bit faster. All right, so let's go into my editor, and I'm doing this twice all the time because my mouse disappears. So this is the initial bootstrap of the React app, right? So let's dig it in a little bit and show you how this works. So it renders app. App uses React Router, and this does a mapping of a configuration file, which is this one. So I have two routes. One is /docs, and one is the initial route. So this is then mapped to a page component, which basically just wraps these routes. And what page does is, I don't want to go into the internals, but all page does is that it checks the component, and if the component has a getInitialProps property. If it does, it will fetch the data, show a loading spinner, and wait until the data is back, and then when the data is there, render the component that is connected to the route. So far, so clear? All right, let's do this. So what I want to do is, I want to render HTML and server-side React in a service worker, so that we can get rid of the spinner initially. So, and the way I do this is, I import a utility that I already wrote. Util is service worker. And this is basically a check in which environment I am. So it is just to check if the window object is available. That's all it does. But I don't want to type this check all the time. So let's go in here and say if not is service worker. We move this thing in, these things in here, and I want to register a service worker. That's basically the same snippet that I already showed you. It's registering the service worker, that is this file here. The catch is that this is the same file that is rendering the React application. So I'm not splitting files here, it's the same bundle, 100% the same. So let's go on here and add self, add event listener. So I'm waiting for fetch events, and these will be called with an event. And then I want to do event, respond with, handle fetch, event. So let's create handle fetch. So this is the function that will be called for every request that goes in and out. I'm going fancy hipster script with async, handle fetch, event. So basically this function now will do two things, and it will depend on one condition. If the request that comes in is a matched route of the routes that I have defined, let's say it is slash or slash docs, I want to do some magic, right? Otherwise, I want to do open a cache, that's for offline handling. I will check if the request or the response or resource is already in the cache. If it's not, I make a request and put it into the cache. So this is basically piping through everything that is not an HTML route. For the HTML part, it becomes a little bit interesting. All right, so let's figure out what route we have here. So this is available in event request URL. And because I don't want to deal with URL parsing, I'm doing this, which is pretty sweet. And then I grab the path of the whole thing, which is URL path name. Is the font size big enough for the people in the back, by the way? Okay. Cool. And now we have to figure out if we are in my routes conditions. So I'm going to bring in React Router. And React Router has a really nice helper function, which is match path. Looks like that can be handy. So let's get routes from routes. So and now what I can do is const matched route equals routes, find route, match path, path, name, and route. So whenever I match now one of these HTML routes that are defined here, we will do some magic. So let's go in here. When we add this path here, what I want to do is I want to define a context object, which basically has a component, which is matched route component. It needs a location object because I have to deal with the React router, and this one needs this information, which will be path name and search, URL search, and it will also need some data. Because we want to prefetch data in the service worker, right? We have this server-side render stuff. So we have to have the data. So now I can go on with if CTX component has get initial props. If this page component needs some data to be fetched before rendered, let's do CTX data equals await. Here we go, hipster script. CTX component get initial props CTX. Cool. We don't need to worry what happens. So what is important here is that get initial props makes an HTTP request. That's all that matters. So in this case, we have a context object available. We have a component. Now what we can do is we can start rendering stuff, right? So let's do this. This is basically an index.html file that I already showed you. That was the start of the single page app with the spinner in the beginning. So let's fix that. So what we can do is we can add a markup variable here, which we now can define. Const markup equals, and for that I now bring in a new dependency, which is React DOM server from React DOM, server. And this one has a really nice function available, which is render to string. Sweet. That doesn't look too bad. So when we go this, we can already switch to the browser and see how far we got. Are you ready? So when I do force reload like this now, you see that still everything is working. This is because it's piped through. When I do force reload, it's always trying to fetch all the things. When I now do this one, I get an error. Ha, but I expected that. So the reason for that is that React Router right now is complaining that it doesn't have access to the DOM and it doesn't have access to the URL bar. So what we have to do is we have to fix our app here. So, and what I can do is I can bring in a static router instead. Cool. So what we do now is we do a similar check, which is if it is service worker, do something, and otherwise use browser router. And what we want to do here is we want to do static router here. Cool. The static router now doesn't have access to the URL bar and to the DOM, so we have to tell it location, props location. I will hand this in a second. So we have to tell it, hey, this is the route you should render. And it also needs some data to display, so we can do props data. So this isn't passed down right now, so let's fix this here. So we bring in a location, which we already have with CTX location, and data equals CTX data. Cool. Let's give this another try. So, and I will clear everything up because service workers can be a little bit hard to work with. So, this is a forced reload. We see a loading spinner, right? This is a shallow reload. And it's still complaining about the, right? Here we go. So what you see here now, this is the response already of the service worker. This is my service worker running React as a server. But you see here that it's not there yet. It shows a loading thing. And the reason for that is that the page component doesn't know yet how to deal with this. So here we have the page component that kicks off get initial props. And this will get handed in some props from the routers. And I just abstracted it away so that I only have to deal with this function here. So when it runs in the static context, what is available is props static context. So when this comes in, what we want to do is we want to return that. Return props static context. And then there's another case that we want to cover. When we serve static HTML in React, we don't want to re-render everything when the bundle kicks in. Then what we want to do is we want to call hydration, right? So that we don't replace everything, and React only has to do attach event listeners. So what we do here is if it's not in a service worker, and if window initial data is defined, what I want to do is I want to catch that, const data, and I want to delete that because I want to be a good citizen, and I want to return that. Cool. So with this, we can now go back to our index file, and we go where the render step is. Remember, when we serve HTML, we don't want to do this. So if there is this, oops, don't do render, but rather do hydrate. And now we don't have window initial data actually available, so what we want to do is we want to get in here, script, window initial data equals JSON stringify CTX data, because we fetched the data above, CTX data, semicolon, and script. Cool. So let's see. So what I do now is I clear the service worker, I call the whole thing here. It doesn't throw an error yet. And when I do now a soft refresh, crowd coding, here we go. Cool. So let's clear that, do a refresh. No error. Did you see that? There was no loading. So what you see here is that I just have server-side React in a service worker, right in the middle. So what does that mean? I could potentially disable JavaScript now. Just potentially, because I will tell you why this is later. So this is without JavaScript, right? What happens? The service worker in the middle fetches all the requests. This is not, yeah, let's stay with this. I will explain a little bit more about this later. Cool? So it worked, kinda. So, what did just happen? So what happened is that my browser makes a request to localhost 8080. This one returns this empty shell, right? It's index.html just with a worker.js. Worker.js is requested, which initializes React and then is actively working and running. This script also... Can you use the microphone? Oh, yeah. Oh. This script also registers the same script as a service worker, which goes in. Now we have the service worker running in the browser, and this one sits now in the middle. And the service worker knows all the HTML routes that should be rendered. So any other HTML navigation will be handled by our React running service worker. I think that's pretty cool. So, could universal workers be a thing? Let's create a cloud worker. So we all know, oh no, maybe you don't, but function as a service is a thing, right? These are these kind of functions that you can deploy somewhere and some provider makes it possible to automatically scale them. You just deploy them and then you basically go with this. And the way it works is that you usually have a JavaScript file that is module exports or exports handler or something like this, which is the same problem then again, because this is not available in the browser ecosystem. But recently I came across Cloudflare workers. And look at this. This is the API they have for serverless functions. Add event listener fetch, and it is pretty much the service worker API that is available in browsers. And when you have a look here, you will see they support fetch, and they support so the fetch event and the fetch function. So what if we take the same bundle now and we deploy it to the cloud? So let's go mirror. Here we go. So this is my Cloudflare account. And the way it works is that Cloudflare workers are basically Google Chrome V8 in the cloud. And here you see the website that I just showed you. So I go to my terminal, I kill this buddy, I call npm run build, which recreates a production build of the worker.js file that I just did, right? So this runs now Webpack and stuff. So I take this worker, remember that is the script that runs React, that runs server-side React in the service worker, and I'm copying it to my clipboard now. And I'm just going to paste it here, and I'm going to deploy it. So this worker here is powering the site React in a worker rocks. So what you see here is that even on a force reload initially, there's no loading spinner. There's no initial blank page. It's the same code running in the cloud. And when I do a soft refresh, everything is taken over by the service worker, running the same code, running the same bundle. I think, yeah. So let's go on with this one. Oh, what? So what happens here is that you make an initial request. This hits not a server or a CDN. It hits the service worker. The service worker runs React on the server side and returns that. Then the website requests worker.js, goes all the way through to the CDN, and installs the service worker, right? So, and then the service worker will take over all the further navigations that need HTML. This way, there is no spinner at all, somewhere. It's always pure HTML, and it's always the same code. So we have worker.js that runs in this function on Cloudflare. We have worker.js that runs in the service worker. And we have worker.js that powers the whole React application. It's one bundle. I don't know how you feel about that, but what is going on? So then there's the question, is this the solution to universal JavaScript? I don't know. Service worker development is very tedious though. I don't know if you have done that, but it's very hard. And a big part of service workers is dealing with caching. And with this, you have caching on the edge node running in Cloudflare with the functions. You have caching in the service worker. You have caching in your CDN. I'm not sure if we need 3 levels of caching. But maybe we do. It's definitely worth investigating though. Maybe this, with a little bit of abstractions, could be easily usable in a framework, right? Service workers is hard, but for example, with a library maintained by Google, with Workbox, service workers are not that hard anymore, because everything is abstracted away. Maybe we could always run React in a service worker. Is that a thing? I don't know. But what I do know and think though is that servers that imitate browser APIs will change the way how we work. Right? We have now ECMAScript modules coming to Node. This will change the ecosystem already a little bit. What if we could all follow Cloudflare? And I don't even work for Cloudflare, right? But I think it's just very cool. What if we could imitate more stuff on the server side so that we can share more code? All right, so if you want to play around with this, reactinnerworker.netlify.com. This is the URL that powers the app without the Cloudflare worker. If you go to www.reactinnerworker.rocks, just because rocks domains are very cheap for some reason. There it runs with the service worker, the React implementation and the Cloudflare worker. And if you want to play around with the complete implementation, you can go to my GitHub account. The slides are here, and yes, I own the domain my links online. Please give me a round of applause, because I think it's so ridiculous. And this talk shouldn't be about universal coding at the end. So the only thing that I would love everybody to take away is that we shouldn't serve spinners, but rather full HTML when we do React. And that's all I got.
Wow, that's all I can say. And to be honest, he's #1 on my list of the most brave developers ever. I personally hate when somebody is looking over my shoulder, just one person. And it was just quite a few of us. Okay, well done. Anybody's got some questions?
It takes a while to take it.
Yeah, so you're coming back next week for the questions, for the QA. Okay, right. Anybody? Oh, you again.
Did you have a lot of issues validating the caches in like Cloudflare and stuff?
All the time. So the thing with this approach is that I basically use the same worker.js file. That is horrible. When you get an exception, you don't know where it's coming from. Is it React.js? Is it Cloudflare? Is it service worker? What's going on at all? So that was very hard, and this gave me the biggest troubles. I think without it, at the end, service worker development is just clear all the time and see how it works at some point, right? But cache and validation was very hard.
How long did it take the Cloudflare? Because I know with AWS is about an hour or 40 minutes.
To be available online?
To invalidate the caches if you need to.
You purge the cache and it's not even a minute.
Oh, okay.
So when you hit the deploy button of the serverless function, it takes, I don't know, 10, 15 seconds. So it's short enough so that you don't have to do anything. And when you hit the purge all button, so you stay at your computer and press refresh. It's not that you hang out for a coffee or something.
So you talked about the service workers. Might be a crazy idea, but so what about something like containerization? So if you were to spin up a Docker container for a service worker, run a process inside it, just like you did it there, with a simple set of code, delete it afterwards once it's done, does that kind of work the same way, or is this methodology the only way that can be done for this problem?
So that could work, but when you spin up a Docker container now, you have the thing, so the service worker is a pure browser API, right? It's really just, there's no thing that emits this on the server side. So then it's the question, when you spin up a Docker container, how do you do this with the service worker? Do you go into Chrome and V8 and get it out? How do... could work. That could work, but then you still would have to spin up Chrome with Puppeteer. The startup times takes a little bit, I guess. It would be possible. If you,
It's just an idea.
Well, if you make that run, hit me up and then let's talk about that.
First of all, thanks. That was obviously very impressive. You clearly know your way around the stack. So far, that felt like a really cool demo, but I'm wondering how scalable or how realistic that is for a real-world application. Like, do you think that those techniques are something that you could actually apply to a real-world React application?
I think there was a real time. There was production ready to me.
So that was clearly just a demo, right? It was 2 routes. The thing with this approach is that it doesn't do route splitting and all these kind of tiny things. And it is very tough, and right now I wouldn't recommend it. I do think, though, when I talk to a person at Cloudflare, so they released Cloudflare workers, I don't know, not even a year ago. So it's really, and they are aware that this works, right? So what I see probably coming, and they will release something. I didn't tell me what they released, but something is coming. They want to push that because this opens new doors. And then at the end, it's just one smart person that builds the abstraction on top, right? That does the splitting. And how far you want to push it, I think the time will tell. This definitely brings more complexity that you may need. But at the end, when you have this kind of application, whatever breaks, something will catch it, right? If your React app breaks, the Cloudflare worker will catch it. At the end, the service worker is in the middle, so it's all offline. So when this whole thing once runs, then you kind of have a battle-proof application, and I think that's an idea worth playing around with. So for now, I cannot tell you, and I wouldn't say that you should do this in production right now, but I do think that some things will happen in the future, at least tryouts.
Thank you very much again for Stefan. It's been an outstanding thing. Very brave guy.